What is going on, my Catella geographers? It is Mr. Majewski, and we are in spring break. And I am going to cover the industry slides/notes for you today so that you are up to date in this information, because we are going to test on this information this week. So follow along. I'm not sure exactly which order I put the notes in. And of course I left them at my classroom. I am broadcasting live from Mr. Majewski's place. So I am going to cover these notes, and hopefully they're in the same order. I can't really recall, but you will improvise, adapt, and overcome. So we're going to start with Chapter 11.1, Industry. Where is industry distributed? And then, of course, we are going to move on to the other industry notes as well. Okay? So where is industry distributed? Chapter 11.1. We got some resources, a mine situation where we're expelling resources. Here we have a mass assembly line, factory production. Here we have iron, or it looks like that's being converted to iron and then converted to steel. Here we have a massive shipping site along a port. This is known as a break of bulk point. The bulk is the cargo. They break it, which means they break it down, and they switch it from sea transport to road or air or train transport. So this is called an entrepot, or a break of bulk point. And then, of course, when we talk about industrialization, we're talking about the switch from human power to machine power. This is some of the earliest machines that were used for spinning thread. That is going to lead to the Industrial Revolution. Okay, let's get started. What is the Industrial Revolution? Well, it's a term we use to describe something that started in England in the 1700s. It first spread to Europe, and then the rest of the English colonies, and eventually to the rest of the world. So England to mainland or continental Europe, and then from there to the European colonies, especially the English colonies first, like the United States, or like the American colonies. And eventually to the rest of the world. Places like South Africa, Australia, which help to explain some of the reasons why they are more developed today than the rest of their region. New Zealand as well. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, almost all manufacturing, which is of course taking raw resources and turning it into finished products, was done completely by hand. It was done by skilled craftsmen who worked in their homes or small shops, usually attached to their homes. This was called the cottage industry. Another word for a home during this time was a cottage, a small home. Since they did the work in the home, they did it in their cottage. It was called cottage industry. This was slow. It was specialized. What I mean is, one or a few people knew these skills in a particular area. They did all the work, beginning, middle to end. They did all the repairs, if you needed repairs done. And so they were limited by their own two hands. And the fact that they didn't really want to share this knowledge, because if they did, there'd be more competition, there'd be more rivals, and they would not be as valued or important or be able to charge the rates that they did. Of course, all of this is going to change. These skilled workers are going to suddenly become obsolete as we move to industrialization, as machines take over a lot of the work for them. What is this all about? Well, there's going to be political changes that come about from these industrial revolution that occurs, social changes, economic changes. All of these are going to lead to new forms of technology. They're going to lead to new inventions. The most important, probably the steam engine. Took water, converted it into steam, which then turned a turbine, which powered the generator, which produced energy. Really quickly, what was the Industrial Revolution? Let's go ahead and watch a YouTube video. Since we are recording, you can watch right along.
Hi, I'm John Green. This is Crash Course World History, and today we're going to discuss the series of events that made it possible for you to watch Crash Course. And also made this studio possible, and made the warehouse containing the studio possible. A warehouse, by the way, that houses stuff for warehouses. That's right, it's time to talk about the Industrial Revolution. Although it occurred around the same time as the French, American, Latin American, and Haitian revolutions between, say, 1750 and 1850, the Industrial Revolution was really the most revolutionary of the bunch. No way, dude. All those other revolutions resulted in, like, new borders and flags and stuff. We've studied 15,000 years of history here at Crash Course Me from the past, and borders and flags have changed plenty, and they're going to keep changing. But in all that time, nothing much changed about the way we disposed of waste, or located drinking water, or acquired clothing. Most people lived on or very close to the land that provided their food, except for a few exceptions. Life expectancy never rose above 35 or below 25. Education was a privilege, not a right. In all those millennia, we never developed a weapon that could kill more than a couple dozen people at once, or a way to travel faster than horseback. For 15,000 years, most humans never owned or used a single item made outside of their communities. Simone Bolivar didn't change that, and neither did the American Declaration of Independence. You have electricity, Industrial Revolution. Blueberries in February, Industrial Revolution. You live somewhere other than a farm, Industrial Revolution. You drive a car, Industrial Revolution. You get 12 years of free formal education, Industrial Revolution. Your bed, your antibiotics, your toilet, your contraception, your tap water, your every waking and sleeping second, Industrial Revolution.
Yep.
Here's one simple statistic
Industrial
that
Revolution.
sums it up. Before the Industrial Revolution, about 80% of the world's population was engaged in farming to keep itself and the other 20% of people from starving. Today, in the United States, less than 1% of people list their occupation as farming. I mean, we've come so far that we don't even have to farm flowers anymore. Are these real, by the way? Can't tell if they're made out of foam or digital. So what happened? Technology. Here's my definition. The Industrial Revolution was an increase in production brought about by the use of machines and characterized by the use of new energy sources. Although this will soon get more complicated, for our purposes today, industrialization is not capitalism, although as we will see next week, it is connected to modern capitalism. And the Industrial Revolution began around 1750, and it occurred across most of the earth, but it started in Europe, especially Britain. What happened? Well, let's go to the thought bubble. The innovations of the Industrial Revolution were intimately interconnected. Like, look for instance at the British textile industry. The invention of the flying shuttle by John Kay in 1733 dramatically increased the speed of weaving, which in turn created demand for yarn, which led to inventions like the spinning jenny and the water frame. Soon these processes were mechanized using water power until the steam engine came along to make flying shuttles really fly in these huge cotton mills. The most successful steam engine was built by Thomas, they didn't name anything after me, Newcomen, to clear water out of mines, and because water was cleared out of those mines, there was more coal to power more steam engines, which eventually led to the fancying up of the Newcomen steam engine by James I Got a Unit of Power and a university named after me, Watt, whose engine made possible not only railroads and steamboats, but also ever more efficient cotton mills. And for the first time, chemicals other than stale urine, I wish I was kidding, were being used to bleach the cloth that people wore. The first of which was sulfuric acid, which was created in large quantities only thanks to lead-lined chambers, which would have been impossible without lead production rising dramatically right around 1750 in Britain, thanks to lead foundries powered by coal. And all these factors came together to make more yarn that could be spun and bleached faster and cheaper than ever before, a process that would eventually culminate in $18 Crash Course Mongol shirts available now at dftba.com. Thanks, Thoughtful, for that shameless promotion of our beautiful, high-quality t-shirts available now at dftba.com. So the problem here is that with industrialization being so deeply interconnected, it's really difficult to figure out why it happened in Europe, especially Britain. And that question of why turns out to be one of the most contentious discussions in world history today. For instance, here are some Eurocentric reasons why industrialization might have happened first in Europe. There's a cultural superiority argument that basically holds that Europeans are just better and smarter than other people. Sometimes this is formulated as Europeans possessing superior rationality. By the way, you'll never guess where the people who make this argument tend to come from, unless you guess that they come from Europe. And then others argue that only Europe had the culture of science and invention that made the creation of these revolutionary technologies possible. Another argument is that freer political institutions encouraged innovation and strong property rights created incentives for inventors. And finally, people often cite Europe's small population because small populations require labor-saving inventions. Oh, it's time for the open letter? An open letter to the steam engine. But first, let's see what's in the secret compartment today. Oh, it's a TARDIS. Truly the apex of British industrialization. Dear steam engine, you know what's crazy? You've never really been improved upon. Like this thing, which facilitates time travel, probably runs on a steam engine. Almost all electricity around the world, whether it's from coal or nuclear power, it's just a steam engine. It's all still just water and heat, and it speaks to how truly revolutionary the Industrial Revolution was, that since then, It's really just been evolution. Best wishes, John Green. So you may have heard any of those rationales for European industrialization, or you may have heard others. The problem with all of them is that each time you think you're at the root cause, it turns out there's a cause of the root cause. Quote Leonardo DiCaprio, James Cameron, and coal mine operators. We have to go deeper. But anyway, the problem with these Eurocentric why answers is that they all apply to either China or India or both. And it's really important to note that in 1800 it was not clear that Europe was going to become the world's dominant manufacturing power in the next 100 years. At the time, China, India, and Europe were all roughly at the same place in terms of industrial production. First, let's look at China. It's hard to make the European cultural superiority argument because China had been recording its history since before Confucius, and plus there was all that huge advantages. First, coal. When you trace the story of improved transportation or communication or industrial efficiency or better chemical manufacturing, it always comes back to coal. Because the Industrial Revolution was all about using different forms of energy to automate production. And England had large supplies of coal that were near the surface, which meant that it was cheap to mine, so it quickly replaced wood for heating and cooking and stuff. So that encouraged the British to look for more coal. The only problem with coal mining, aside from it being, like deadly and everything, is that the coal mines flooded all the time. I guess coal mining is also problematic for the health of the planet. But because there was all this incentive to get more coal out of the ground, steam engines were invented to pump water out of the mines. And because those early steam engines were super inefficient, they needed a cheap and abundant source of fuel in order to work, namely coal, which meant they were much more useful to the British than anyone else. So steam engines used cheap British coal to keep British coal cheap, and cheap British coal created the opportunity for everything from railroads to steel, which, like so much else in the Industrial Revolution, created a positive feedback loop. Because they run on rails, railroads need steel, and because it is rather heavy, steel needs railroads. Secondly, there were wages. Britain, and to a lesser extent the Low Countries, had the highest wages in the world at the beginning of the 18th century. In 1725, wages in London were the equivalent of 11 grams of silver per day. In Amsterdam, they were 9 grams. In Beijing, Venice, and Florence, they were under 4. And in Delhi, they were under 2. It's not totally clear why wages were so high in Britain. Like, one argument is that the Black Death lowered population so much that it tightened labor markets, but that doesn't explain why wages remained low in, plague-ravaged Italy. Mainly, high wages combined with cheap fuel costs meant that it was economically efficient for manufacturers to look to machines as a way of lowering their production costs. To quote the historian Robert Allen, wages were high and energy was cheap. These prices led directly to the Industrial Revolution by giving firms strong incentives to invent technologies that substituted capital and coal for labor. Stan, I'm a little worried that people are still going to accuse me of Eurocentrism.
All right, I'm going to stop it there. Thank you, John Green, for stepping in there. Gives you an idea of what the Industrial Revolution was all about. Let's get back to it. Okay. What was the revolution? Well, we already talked about it. It was the switch from massive to massive mass production provided by machines, from handmade human power, to switch from agricultural to an industrial life, a switch from rural to urban living as more and more people flock to cities and engage in manufacturing jobs. It increased productivity in countries, which increased the standard of living for almost everybody that lived there. So chances are you are healthier, you're living longer, you're having more children because there's more kids that are probably surviving, through childbirth. Your money's going further than it did before, which means your wages are probably higher than other people who have the same job around the rest of the world. You live in better conditions or circumstances. It wasn't great. It was still horrible for the lower classes, the working classes, but it was still better than a lot of other places around the world. It was the reason that Europe went into stage 2 of the demographic transition. Remember, they industrialized through the Industrial Revolution. So one after the other, Europe and then North America, and to a lesser extent Oceania, all go through stage 2 on their own as they industrialize. Industries that were most affected, it begins with really coal and iron. Iron's one of the first. Steam engines give energy production, give energy to produce iron. Iron is iron ore. It's turned into a superheated, hardened metal iron that is super strong, able to build huge projects with it, including some large buildings. Of course, the key is coal. Coal is the energy source that powered steam engines. Of course, you mine coal from the ground. It's like an ore, I guess you could say, that you then burn. Textiles. Textiles is clothing. The first factories that were used used spinning machines that were developed specifically for sewing and for fabricating or making textiles, clothing. So again, this time it was water power that was used in order to spin the wheels. Water used from the rapidy rivers that were located alongside the textile factories in many towns and cities. Transportation, canals were built, then railroads were built to transport inputs, which are raw materials, and then transport those to the factories to be turned into finished goods. Then those railroads or canals could then you could load products onto the railroad, or you could load them onto the barge or the ship, and you could send those finished products to the markets to be sold to people. Chemicals. Textile bleaches were used for the first time. I talked about that in John Green's video. Bleaches are used for the first time for textiles. Dyes are developed for clothing as well. Food production. We develop sterilization. We start to preserve food better. We develop refrigeration, especially. Eventually refrigerated rail cars, which allow us to transport perishable goods further than ever before. Here we can see it looks to me like steel that's being produced here at a steel mill out of superheated iron that's being heated by the burnt coal. Here we have iron and steel rods, as they're called. This is what finished steel is rolled into to be used for fabrication. Whoops, what did I just do? Oh boy. Here we have coal mines, right, that have been dug into the earth. You see almost just like excavated directly from the earth, giant holes in the earth where coal is being extracted along with other, it looks to me, like limestone and other minerals as well. Early railroad, right, that was used, to transport coal. It was fueled by coal or the steam engine. It would transport coal, it would transport iron and steel. Remember, it had to it was heavy. These were huge engines, so they had to be carried along steel railroads as well. So you see how these industries kind of benefited one another. This is an early textile factory. You can see mass production, huge numbers of machines inside factories, tight clustered conditions, a lot of moving parts at once, dangerous work. Women a lot of times are employed, especially in sewing textile factories, instead of men. Let's go to industrial regions. Today, industrial regions of the world, there are three of the 9 world regions are considered industrialized. That means fully industrialized, where the entire economy or a majority of it is based on manufacturing, a majority of the economy. Europe, North America, and East Asia. Those are our 3 industrialized regions. Each is responsible for about 25%, so 1/4 of the world's industrial output, 25% in Europe, 25% in North America, 25% in East Asia, and then 25% of the manufacturing everywhere else in the rest of the world combined. We subdivide regions as well. The first major industrial region is Europe. We subdivide it into West and East, and then we look at the core areas. These are the areas where most or all industry is clustered and production actually occurs. As you can see, in Western Europe, it clusters in a half-moon pattern and a reverse half-moon, as if the half-moon went the other direction. All right? We start from top to bottom, United Kingdom. This is the oldest industrial region. This used to be where the industrialization started. This used to be massive amounts of coal and iron, eventually steel. Over time, those jobs left. They went to Southern and Eastern Europe, or they moved overseas to China and other places like that, just like in the U.S. And so this area has kind of reinvented itself now as more high-tech, high-skilled jobs. It's highly educated because there's a number of colleges in the area, in the region, high-quality colleges. And so they've reinvented themselves as professional jobs like management, administration, banking, entertainment, and then high-tech skilled jobs in the technologies as well. All right? Second area is called the Rhine-Ruhr Valley. It's located right here between the Rhine and the Ruhr rivers. It is considered by many to be by far the most important industrial region in Western Europe, and one of the most important in the world. There's a huge combination of things that are produced here. You produce iron, steel, railroads, and all other types of industries mixed in as well. It's dispersed across the entire region, and then in addition to all of the iron and steel and the railroad production that you see there, it's a mass. It's the largest port in Europe. Rotterdam, which is the sister city of Amsterdam. There it is on the map, Rotterdam. And so, hey, it's a massive production and shipping facility region, more coming in and leaving than any other place in Europe. It is just a powerhouse. Speaking of powerhouses, gosh darn it, let's go to the Mid-Rhine. Mid-Rhine region, Central Europe, right along the border between France and Germany. By the way, obviously we know where the United Kingdom's core is at. Rhine River Valley is the Low Countries, so Belgium, the Netherlands, portions of Germany, and a little bit of France. Now, the Mid-Rhine region here, this includes German and French border regions along the Rhine River, which is the river that separates the two countries. We have major population centers here: Frankfurt, Mannheim, Stuttgart. We have tons of natural resources, especially coal. What does that mean? When you have coal, it means you make iron and you produce steel. We also have, this is kind of the finance center of Western Europe. All the banking is clustered here. A lot of the stock companies, but especially banks, huge, powerful banks. We've heard of Swiss banks before, right? They're located in this area as well. A lot of high-tech industry, high-tech firms. BMW and other high-tech auto manufacturers are located in this area as well. So this is like the production and banking powerhouse of Western Europe. Think of what these places would be in the United States, all right? Ultimately, we go next down to the Po Basin. It's located in Italy, in northern Italy. They produce two things, primarily textiles, clothing, and a lot of electricity. That means they produce aluminum as well. Why? There's a lot of rapidy rivers in this area which allow for the production of electricity and aluminum. You need electricity to produce aluminum. And then there's cheap workforces here. Did you see in the video how Italian workers made significantly less than other Europeans? Southern Europeans make less than Northern Europeans. And so just like we've seen U.S. companies move from northern states to the Sun Belt, we've seen European companies relocate to Southern Europe, especially Italy and Spain, in an effort to try to take advantage of lower wages in those particular areas. And then finally, Catalonia. Catalonia is located in Spain. It's located in the Barcelona area. It's our newest industrial area. Textiles, again, taking advantage of lower wages than you would pay, for instance, if you had located in Northern Europe. And then automobiles, new automobile production. Some of the German manufacturers, for instance, have set up factories there to take advantage of lower wage workers as well. Eastern Europe, well, look at all those regions. We're going to go a little quicker here. Most of these areas developed originally by the Soviets. The Soviet Union focused on industrialization. And then they really focused around all the huge amount of resources that Eastern Europe has. It has a ton, especially located across, massive Russia because it's so huge. So we start with the cities, and again, we're going to kind of go in a circular, clockwise sort of direction, I think. We start with Moscow and St. Petersburg. We kind of lump them together. Those are the two population centers. We'll start with Moscow. Large population, produce a lot of fabrics, sometimes textiles. More skilled jobs, again, usually capitals, huge cities like the United Kingdom with London and Cambridge, like New York City in the U.S., and Moscow in Eastern Europe. Large population, a little more educated than the rest of the country, so more skilled jobs as well. All right, so they will produce more skilled consumer goods. Automobiles is a good example of that. St. Petersburg, you'll notice they're located as a port in the northern sea area. The Baltic Sea as well, second largest population in all of Russia, so they're going to take advantage of that with mass production. It also is the center of the naval and shipbuilding industry, so a huge amount of naval and shipbuilding is done there. It's the center of their port area, and so that's really the focus of their industry as well. Then we get to the resource areas. Now that we're out of the two population centers, we get to the resource-rich places. We go to the Volga, probably the most important in all of Russia. It's got tons of petroleum, oil. It's got tons of natural gas. And it also has massive amounts of automobile and machinery centers. So we're building automobiles, we're building machinery. A lot of Russian cars are being built, and Russian heavy machinery. In addition to the oil, in addition to the natural gas, we see lots of wealth up and along the Volga River, and that's why it's such a large region, because it goes along the river, both on both sides of it. The Urals, which is located obviously around the Ural Mountains, which tells us what's going to be there, mountainous. And remember, the Urals are the mountains that separate the European portion from the Asian portion of Russia. It has some of the largest mineral deposits in the world. Iron, steel, chemical industry is also located there to be located close to the minerals they need in order to operate. Kuznetsk, the furthest east by far. It's the only one that's located in the Asian portion of Russia. Oil, coal, obviously coal means iron and steel. You do have to transport further from this location, though it's not a major deal anymore, as much of a deal as it used to be. Donetsk. Donetsk is located along the Ukrainian, it's in Ukraine, so the former Soviet Union. Doesn't technically belong to Russia, although this area is one that's being disputed today, where the Russians are trying, remember, to support rebels in this area that are loyal to Russia, to claim this region for Russia instead. I wonder why. Coal, ore, natural gas, we know what that means, iron and steel. And then Silesia. Silesia is the only of the Eastern European mineral areas or industrial areas not located in the old Soviet Union. A lot of coal fields, a lot of steel, divided between Poland, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia. On to North America. Remember, the Industrial Revolution started later in the U.S. than other places, but it occurred faster. And so it started later, but it happened to go by quicker. The first factory didn't come to the U.S. until the 1790s, which again was almost 100 years after other places started the process. When it did come, the northeastern United States, the place we consider New England today, and southeastern Canada were the center of all industry in this country. It was the first place in North America to be settled. U.S. by Britain, Canada by the French. It was a closer proximity to Europe, right? It was closer to Europe than other parts of the United States or North America. Therefore, it was easier for us to get resources and products from them. It was easier for us to get our resources to Europe and to get finished products from them. And we had closer, larger markets that were more closely connected and attached to Europe. We also had a ton of resources. If there's one thing North America had an incredible abundance of, it was resources. We also had many different transportation sources like rivers, like the Mississippi, and the Great Lakes region as well. Our industry, we have a number of very specialized areas within the country, specialized industrial core areas where certain types of production are clustered or focused, just like in Europe and in East Asia. We started in New England. New England, of course, is located in the area around Boston, Massachusetts. It's our oldest area. Of course, it too is a lot like United Kingdom. It's where textiles began. After New England, we go down the coastline to the powerhouse of Middle Atlantic. It's our largest industrial region in terms of consumers, people. It has massive populations like New York City, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, D.C. It's the center of trade and shipping in the United States, especially port trade, sea trade. It is our center of finance in New York City with banks and Wall Street. It's our center of communications, major news stations. It's our center of politics as well. And it's, our center of entertainment, right? All of our major television studios and radio studios are located there as well. Next up is the Mohawk Valley. You'll see this is kind of the area around Buffalo, New York, and into Canada. This is the area that includes Canada. It really covers the Erie Canal, which was a man-made canal that connected this area to New York City. It connected the Great Lakes to New York City. And it's centered around Great Lakes area, so therefore there's a lot of steel because, of course, we have iron and coal being produced. There's a lot of food production in this area, so a lot of canning and mass production of food products. We've got chemicals that are being produced. We've got aluminum being produced with the large amounts of fresh water. We've got paper, thanks to a lot of forested areas in this region as well. A lot of our paper is produced in the Mohawk Valley, not only in the United States, but also Canada. So again, it follows the Erie Canal and the northern Great Lakes. Steel, food production, chemicals, aluminum, paper. And then Pittsburgh, down here, Pittsburgh and Lake Erie. You know the Pittsburgh Steelers, so it's probably clear to you this is the center. This was the center of the steel industry in the 18 and 1900s. Coal, iron ore made this the steel center. A lot of steel mines and steel mills located there. And we have the Western Great Lakes region. It's the area that includes, Chicago and Detroit. Transportation, massive amounts of railroads, cars being produced here. Agricultural machines like John Deere and Caterpillar are located in this area. Automobiles as well. Detroit is considered our automobile center. Steel production, a lot of steel mills, motor vehicles, mentioned those already, heavy machinery, food, industrial products, food is being produced here and canned and shipped all over. Slaughterhouses are located in this area as well. This is our distribution area. This is kind of the pulse or the heart that gets everything where it needs to be around the rest of the country. It gets them to the port regions. The ports take in the products, I think you could say, and ship them out. But this is really what the center of our transportation network, our hub, and that gets us all of the products that we need where they need to be inside the country. Southern California is considered to be a industrial core region as well. It's the largest outside of northeastern United States. It's a center of the aircraft industry. Boeing has facilities located here, for instance. A lot of aircraft research like Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman. A lot of furniture. High quality furniture that's built in Southern California. A lot of textiles, clothing, especially in Los Angeles area. A lot of factories in that area, and food. A lot of food products and food industries, especially specialty food industries as well. Can't forget, going back to Southeast Ontario, located here on the map. It is the largest in North America that's outside of the U.S. It's smaller than Southern California. And again, just like the Mohawk Valley, they focus on steel, aluminum, motor vehicles, textiles, paper, and food. A little more motor vehicle production here than there is in the Mohawk Valley. A lot of cheap electricity. And so a lot of dams, which means a lot of aluminum production as well. East Asia, really, you need to know that there's 2 located in Japan and 3 located in China. With few resources and really distant from the markets, Asian countries really rely on their massive populations to achieve manufacturing dominance. They really focus on low-cost labor. So we know how we talked about how European and American companies a lot of times have relocated to the southern portions of their continents, for instance, to the southern U.S. or to Latin America. If they can find even cheaper options over in China, then they've oftentimes taken advantage of that as well. So Japan became an industrial power in the 50s and 60s. We helped to rebuild them after World War II. They used to make cheap goods. Now they're known for higher quality goods by skilled workforces. They make motor vehicles and electronics more than anything else. They're concentrated around 2 urban powerhouse centers. Tokyo, Yokohama is one of them, the 2 largest cities in that region, and then Osaka, Kobe, Kyoto down in the southern portions of the country. Those are the powerhouses or the hearts of the country in terms of production. Huge populations, huge concentration of people and industry located there. A lot of banking and finance being produced, entertainment as well in Japan. China is the largest supplier of people, of workers, of labor, and of markets in the world, which means buyers as well. Huge growth in this country based on textile production, low-wage workers making low-cost clothing. Steel, they've really taken over the steel industry in modern times. More steel being produced in China than anywhere else. And household goods, especially inexpensive, cheap household goods. Again, taking advantage of those massive populations, which means incredibly cheap workforces. They're centered in 3 areas along the coast. In northern China, along the coast, it's the Beijing area. It's called Tianjin, Beijing, Shenyang. These areas centered around Beijing are an export region or area that allows foreign companies to set up there and then to ship their products, not only sell them in China, but ship them outside of the country back to their home countries to be sold. The Shanghai region follows the Yellow River, the Yangtze River Valley, and then that's in central China. Banking, entertainment, finance are the hearts of this area. And then, of course, Hong Kong as well, banking, entertainment. Both of these regions didn't always belong to China. They were owned by European countries. Only recently has China come to obtain them. All right, so anyways, you need to know them as well, just like the other regions. Mr. M signing off here on our first video, but I'm going to come back at you here with the next couple here in a bit. All right, friends, so we are jumping over to these slides now, the Chapter 11 industry slides. It starts with situation factors. I may even add a few things to these slides as we go. I don't really like how some of the definitions here go. All right, so we're going to start with something here. In fact, I'm going to start it right from the very top. All right, we're going to be talking something right now from a guy named Alfred Weber. All righty. It's called the industrial location model. All right, and Alfred Weber, obviously, Weber, all right, is his name. Weber is a German geographer. And what he basically talked about was, hey, when a business owner wants to decide where to set up a factory or where to set up their business, they take certain factors into account when they make that decision. And Weber discovered, and if I call him Weber, don't kill me, okay? He identified what he called certain factors. Some he called site factors, some he called situation factors, that he said businesses use to determine where to locate their businesses, their factories, to make the most amount of profit. And so he's going to use geographic principles to try to better understand and theorize why businesses and industry locate where they do. So the first thing that he identified were situation factors. Situation factors are situational in that they are changed depending on where the factory or the facility is located. And so depending on place to place to place, they're going to be different. All right. So a situational factor, he said, involved transportation. Things that were controlled by where you located. And so what he said is that a company wants to locate either close to where they're receiving their raw materials, or they want to locate closer to where they sell their products. And what's going to determine that? Well, he said the cost of either transporting the raw materials to the factory, or the cost of transporting the finished product to the market. If the former is larger, if it costs more to transport the raw materials to the factory than it does to transport the finished product to the market, then the business needs to locate closer to the raw materials. So in that instance, it would want to locate closer to the raw materials, to the source of where they're getting their products, because that's what's costing them more to transport. If for whatever reason it's costing the company more to transport their finished product after it's been produced at the factory, then they will probably want to locate their factory closer to the market so that they can reduce the cost of transporting that good to the market, since that's the highest cost of production. So situation factors are a firm seeks to locate a location that minimizes the cost of transporting their inputs to the factory and their finished good to the consumers. They're going to locate ideally wherever that cost, a balance between the two, is the best. And what he said, Weber, was that there were really two types of industries. There were bulk reducing and there were bulk gaining industries. Bulk reducing industries are industries where the inputs, the resources that are used to produce them, weigh more than the final product. For instance, the copper industry. Copper is mined, then concentrated near mining places. So what we mean there is copper industries, copper mining companies have to mine underground. They have to dig up huge amounts of rock and dirt to try to find and extract the copper. Then they have to transport those that debris to the facility to be sorted, to be smelted, and turned into a finished copper product. A whole bunch of heavy, dirty, hard material is eventually replaced or smelted down into a small amount of copper that comes out of it. So their major cost is getting their input, their copper ore, to the facility to be turned into refined copper. That's where their biggest cost is, because that's where their heaviest weights and things are. So for instance, their railroad costs are going to be much more to get their product to their facility than they would to be the small amount of copper that's produced to the market to be sold. And so therefore, these copper smelting material facilities are going to be located very close to the mines in which the copper ore is mined to reduce that transportation cost. That's a bulk reducing industry. So any industry where the inputs when the final product is produced, it weighs less than the inputs needed to make it, is a bulk reducing industry. All right. And again, minerals are a great example, because a lot of rock, dirt, and other material needed to be extracted in order to produce small amounts of minerals. Think of diamonds. How much rock and earth has to be extracted in order to find a single diamond, right? Steel, oil, coal, all of these things. A lot of minerals, a lot of natural resources. They have to have a lot of water in the process. That means that water has to be transported to the facility as well, right? Through the process. So think about that. It's not just the material itself. A lot of times, if you're going to need water in the process, you're going to need tanks filled with water, trucks filled with water, tankers, to be bringing that to your facility, which is going to add to the weight of production as well. Okay? Lot of products. If there's multiple, I think, steps in the production process where you're whittling it down, you're fine-tuning it, you're making it smaller, you're extracting, a lot of inputs, but very little product comes out of it, or less product comes out of it, that is a bulk reducing industry. Opposite of that is a bulk gaining industry. Bulk gaining industries are going to be located closer to the market, because their products gain weight through the production process, and so their transportation costs are actually higher after the product has been produced. Bulk gaining products, something that gains volume or weight during production. Soft drink bottling, think about this, right? Empty cans are sent to the bottler. They're filled at the bottling facility. Then they're sent to the consumer. So transportation costs are actually a lot higher after the soft drink has been canned or bottled, because the weight of it has increased significantly, which is going to be more of a cost for distribution. So they tend to locate and build bottling companies much closer to consumers. Our bottling companies are located in, for instance, Irwindale, and right outside of Orange County, so that they can supply the needs of the people in a few minutes or hours. Other companies that locate close to the markets, single market manufacturers. A single market manufacturer produces one product that is usually used by the way, other bulk gaining industries, auto manufacturers, because you have a bunch of small parts that are being shipped individually to the factory. They're being assembled at the factory, so the car weighs more when it's all put together than the individual parts that were used to build it, that were sent there on their own. Single market manufacturer produces one product that is used by usually another company, and so they really only have one buyer, one market, one individual, or one company that buys their product. Usually it's because their product is used in that other company's larger product. So for instance, a lot of auto manufacturers don't build all the parts to their car. They might have one company build their side view mirrors. They might have another company build their rear view mirror. That company, the small market manufacturer, only builds that rear view mirror for one or two or three auto manufacturers. That's the only product they make, and they only have one buyer. What that means is they're completely dependent on the parent company, the larger company, the only ones that buy their products. And so single market manufacturers tend to locate very close to the larger company that they work with. So when the larger company needs those windshields, those mirrors, They can get them right away from the single market manufacturer who's located directly nearby them. I mean, let's face it, if you only had one buyer, one client, chances are you'd locate right real close to them so you could meet their needs as quickly as possible. All right, so that's a single market manufacturer. Any business that makes a product that is then used in another business's product, so a piece of their product, is a single market manufacturer and is usually going to be located very close to the larger company. Perishable products, ice cream, newspapers, any material that is perishable, which means it can go bad. It's got a limited shelf life. I need to learn how to spell. Newspapers, fresh fruit or veggies. These products tend to be located very close to the markets because they must get their products to the market as quickly as possible. And get them on the shelves so that they can be sold before they go bad. That includes information like newspapers as well. A lot of newspaper distributors are located right directly near their facilities for the same reason. So again, Weber says situation factors that affect your location are either bulk reducing factors, right, which means you locate close to your inputs, which means you locate close to your resources, or they are bulk gaining, which means they locate close to the markets. Have you ever wondered why maybe certain factories are located further away from cities, and why other factories might be located closer to the cities, right on the outskirts of them or directly in them? Well, it probably has a lot to do with whether they are bulk reducing, bulk gaining, or whether they perhaps are a single market manufacturer, which would explain their location, or perishable products. Again, which would explain their location. Folks, again, this is known as the industrial location model by Alfred Weber. All right, speaking of transportation, others say there are four major types of transportation that exist. There is trucks, there is train, there is shipping, and there is air. And depending on, your distance that you want to travel and the speed which you want to travel, and the cost you're willing to spend, different transportation methods make different sense depending on what's being transferred. All right, we're going to start with the fastest and get it out of the way. I'm going to go in a little bit of an opposite order from what it looks like here. Air. Air is our fastest method of transportation. It's also the most expensive. Air is usually used for high-profile exports, expensive exports, where cost is really important. It's really high, and so the client usually wants it there immediately. It's usually used for smaller, more sensitive products as well. That can be shipped by air, where speed is of the essence. It's really expensive, and it's not mass produced. It's not used at a mass level. What are used on the mass level? These other three types. By far, shipping is cheapest. It is the cheapest long distance of the longest distances. It is slow compared to the other methods. So if speed is not as important, but you got to travel long distances, heavier products, shipping is a necessity. Obviously, for traveling overseas, it's the only option unless you're going to expend expensive amounts on air travel. And then on land, the good things about shipping, again, it's cheap. It goes long distances. There's no real set lanes where you have to go, so it's easier to get your product where it needs to be, unlike trains, for instance, which are limited by the rail patterns that exist. Speaking of trains, they're excellent for long land distances, for medium to long distances. It's the cheapest method of land travel. It's one of the cheaper methods. And it's not as fast as trucks, so that is a problem. Usually you are limited again by the railroad network, which might mean you might need to use another method of transportation to finish the journey for the product if a train cannot deliver it directly to the market. Speaking of the last method of land transportation, that's trucks, usually used for shorter distances. By the way, shorter distances are usually like up to a day or 2 days maximum. Trains are usually, 3 to 5 days, maybe a week. Ships are usually multiple weeks, whereas air obviously is a few hours. Trucks are great short distance. It's cheap, especially to load and unload compared to the other methods. Trains are more expensive than trucks to load and unload. It takes longer as well. Ships are even longer and more expensive. And of course, air transport usually doesn't make sense for large numbers of products to be exported. So trucks, short distances, cheap, especially to load and unload, usually more access with road networks than with railroad networks. Trains, good for medium to long distances on land, relatively cheap, slower than trucks, but cheaper and can carry heavier loads. Shipping can carry massive loads. It's even cheaper than the other methods. It's longer as well. And then air is the fast method. So every business usually decides, hey, what's the best method for us? A lot of times they use multiple methods. So they'll use, a ship to get it across the ocean. Then they'll load it onto railroad trains, to railroad cars, and they'll lug it by train to the city. Then they'll load it onto a truck and carry it to the even individual stores in the city. Anytime a product or a company has to change transportation modes, they do that at what's called a break of bulk point. These are locations where there are machines and available to be used that load and offload products from one form of transportation to the other. Usually this means containers. Remember, nowadays we use container ships which carry the containers to the port. They unload. Those containers are loaded onto rail cars, right? And then they can be loaded onto truck beds as well. So that's what we call standardization, where more and more around the world with globalization, all of our products are being produced in these same containerized squares or rectangles, so it's easier to load and offload them at break of bulk points using cranes and other machines to lift, pick them up, put them on, and to do it as quickly as possible at these break of bulk points. Break of bulk points are usually ports, airports, shipping areas, warehouses that are receiving a lot of products coming in and a lot of products going out, are almost always break of bulk points. Any airport or port is going to have facilities where you can load containers from ships to railroads and so on and so forth, or attach them to trucks which can then take them around to the city or the rest of the country. Site factors are different. Site factors are factors that every business has to pay, no matter what, and each company has to decide which of these three site factors is most important to them, and it will help them to determine what specific site is the best location for them to be located. So the three site factors are land, labor, and capital. And so these are a little bit more general, all right? Land, first off. Factories are more likely to be located on suburban or rural land rather than near city centers. Why? Because suburban and rural land is cheaper. And oftentimes factories need large amounts of land in order to, build their facility, because factories need a lot of space in order to produce. And so they tend to be located a little bit further outside of city centers. Remember, city centers, downtown areas, are usually the highest property values in an area. The land's much cheaper there. It's cheaper for businesses, for retail to locate, which need more space. Also, industries can be attracted, depending on what they're producing, to certain parcels of land that have access to certain energy. For instance, coal mines or coal companies might be interested in coal fields. Oil companies are going to be interested in oil fields. Aluminum and electricity are going to be located being located near large amounts of fresh water, especially rapidy water that they can potentially dam and be used for hydroelectric power. So land is a factor that helps companies to determine where they're going to be located. Usually the cost of land is the factor here, which means they're going to try to find the space that allows them to locate as close to their situational needs, their inputs or their markets, while at the same time taking into account trying to find the cheapest spot for land that they can. Labor. It's another factor that all businesses must consider. They need to be located close enough to workers so that they have the workers that they need in order to operate or function. They want as many workers as possible, and sometimes if they're located too far away from labor areas or from areas with the workforce they need, that can be devastating to their business. This is especially the case with what we call labor-intensive industries. Labor-intensive industries are industries in which the cost of the worker is the highest percentage of their expense. So if their highest cost is their worker, paying their workers' wages, then that is a labor-intensive industry. And it doesn't matter what you make. You can make something cheap or you can make something expensive. But if your highest cost as a business is the wage of your worker, you are labor-intensive. Teaching is labor-intensive, for instance. The highest cost is our wages. Anyways, you need to be located in an area where you have an abundant amount of labor. Enough labor to meet your needs. This is especially the case, folks, if you are labor dependent or labor intensive, where you need specific types of workers or skilled workers. You have to be located in an area where there is a workforce that meets those needs. If you're a tech company or a skilled company, you probably want to be located in an area near colleges and universities with a lot of advanced professionals and graduates. Why do you think tech companies located in the Silicon Valley near Stanford and Berkeley? Why do you think they locate in the Research Triangle around Vanderbilt and North Carolina and Duke? Because those areas have a lot of the workers that they need. Clothing was once made by MDCs, but now it's being made in LDCs. Why? Because those are labor-intensive industries. And what clothing businesses realized is, hey, if I'm spending $20 an hour on my factory worker making my clothes in Maine or in Massachusetts, and I move to Florida and I can pay my worker $10 an hour, then I'm not nearly as labor intensive as I used to be. And if I can move to China and pay him $2 an hour, I've just cut my cost per worker by $18 an hour, which means I'm going to make incredibly more profit. So U.S. textile companies move to places where they can find low-cost employees, down to the Sun Belt, maybe down to Mexico, or even all the way to China. Is labor costs, because transportation costs have gone down so much, labor is something that a business can focus on and really figure, where can we cut labor costs even by a cent here or there? It can make huge differences. Skilled labor industries are some firms require workers to perform highly skilled tasks. Electronics manufacturing, for instance, they have to locate close to relatively skilled labor forces. They oftentimes introduce new work rules to try to promote these types of workers, to relocate to them, to take jobs with them. They offer awesome incentives. They give good wages. They give good benefits because they are dependent on skilled workers in order for their businesses to function. Types of production. Hey, up until World War II, we used something called Fordist production. It was mass production. Each worker was assigned one task to perform. They did it repeatedly. They only really knew that one task. They couldn't produce the entire machine, only one piece or part of it. They were one cog or piece of the production machine, and that's really all they did on the assembly line. Over time, we've developed something called, and by the way, that was developed by a guy named Henry Ford. He developed it with the Ford Motor Company. It mass-produced products cheaper than ever before, allowed us to mass-produce cars, sell them, make them affordable where everybody could afford them. Problems with Fordist production is that it's kind of boring work, it's monotonous work, and makes people not really care about their work as much. There's not as much pride, and kind of workers can sometimes be taken advantage of. Post-Fordist is a more modern type of production method. It's used by a lot of Japanese car companies like Toyota and Honda. It's more flexible rules. Workers are assigned to teams, and the teams kind of perform a variety of tasks together as they see fit. They kind of decide who does what and when. Teams are encouraged to hang out outside of work. They're actually given money to hang out together. It's supposed to be a more open and friendly environment. It's more based on teamwork and problem solving in small groups that you develop with your group mates. You develop kind of a relationship with the group of workers that you work with, your group mates. There's usually a team leader. And so there's not as much managers as there are workers working together. It's viewed as more efficient, more productive. It's especially popular with millennials who kind of enjoy the team-based concept in the workplace. Capital is money. It's the third type of site factor that exists. Land, labor, and capital. Capital is money. And businesses must have capital in order to function, in order to grow. They must have a what we would call cash flow. This is especially a problem in LDCs where this can be hard for them to get. They have to be able to borrow money. Businesses oftentimes borrow money and then they pay that money back. And then it's kind of a cycle where they're borrowing more money, paying it back, so they can borrow more. To expand, because hey, to run and build a business is super expensive. To expand it is even more expensive. You got to risk, you got to borrow money in order to grow and make more money. And this is hard, remember, in LDCs that struggle to get capital from banks or from private companies, and even sometimes from the UN. And so a lot of times financial industries, banks in LDCs, or even LDC countries or companies, will seek loans from banks and MDCs. Now, it's not just an LDC problem. Remember, even in the United States, companies need money to grow, to expand. And so they'll go to banks and they will borrow those monies in order to allow them to do so. A footloose industry. A footloose industry is an industry that can locate in a wide variety of places. They can be located in places that, because their costs really don't change when it comes to transportation, land, labor, and capital. For instance, a footloose company would be a company that can communicate through computers, so therefore they're not really necessarily producing anything. They're not making products, manufacturing products, which means therefore they might not have to deal with site factors or situation factors. They're more free to locate where they want. They're more free to pick up and leave. There's not as many negative penalties for them to pick up and leave to a new location, especially overseas. And so oftentimes these are the companies that are most likely to leave an area. And when they do, that can cause a lot of problems to the area that they leave. A lot of times what happens is cities or counties will try to get a company to agree to a lease to stay there for a certain number of years to avoid a footloose company from up and leaving. A lot of call centers where, let's say you have a problem with your cable or your credit card bill. You call into a call center. A lot of times they're footloose. They can be located anywhere that is an English-speaking place. And they can up and leave and relocate if, for instance, rent is better in a new location, or if they don't have to pay taxes to a certain city or county. That gives them a break. All right, folks, I'm going to stop there with these slides, and we are going to finish up with the last set of slides on industry that I asked you to cover. All right, folks, so we're going to finish up with these last set of slides. And industrial geography. How has industrial location changed in modern times? And these are text heavy, as you can see. So, hey, new industrial regions within MDCs, and we start with the United States. So this is a universal rule. This is a worldwide rule, but it especially applies in the U.S. The biggest site factor in modern times is labor. And here's why. Because transportation costs have been reduced so much during modern times that industries really don't have to pay attention as much to the other site factors and even as much to situation factors as they did in the past. So industries have generally moved to where large and low-cost labor exists for them because they've been able to pay higher site and situation costs in the other factors, and it's offset because they save so much money from lower wage workers. So the savings in wages with their workers offsets slightly higher site and situation costs for the other factors. This means they have started to move out of the old areas of industrial strength. So they've started to move out of northwestern Europe and out of the northeastern United States. They've moved in two directions. They've moved interregionally. So in the United States, they've moved south and west, of course, into the Sun Belt from the north or the northeast, right, out of the Rust Belt into the Sun Belt, and that's interregional migration We know that part of it's weather, but a lot of it has to do, of course, more than anything, with population movement, and more importantly, to the factors we'll discuss below. And then in Europe, they flowed to the economically distressed areas. Remember, the UN identifies like the convergence and the divergence zones. Economically distressed peripheral areas, those are in southern and eastern Europe. So they've moved from northern and western Europe, and they've moved more south, and they've moved east into southern and eastern Europe. Again, for the exact same reasons, taking away of low-cost wage workers in those areas. In the U.S., there's been a lot of reasons why they've moved towards the Sun Belt since, the 1950s, 60s. Number one, there's been more growth, industrial growth in the South and in the West. There's been U.S. government policies that have built infrastructure. We've built highway systems. We have built road networks. We have built railroad networks that better connect these regions, the South and the West, to the rest of the country than ever before, especially industrially. In addition to that, there's inventions that have been developed that have opened up the South and the West. Remember, they're hot, they're humid, or they're hot and dry out west. They're hot. And so inventions like the air conditioning, there's probably no more important invention to the settlement of these regions than air conditioning. And the better weather attracted businesses, they attracted industry, and they connected labor. Think about this. If you're a business, every day of production matters. Every day you're not producing is costing you money. So let's say that you have, 10 days that you lose each year because of bad weather, or 5 days. That can be millions and millions of dollars. Let's say you lose 3 or 4 days of production to snowstorms every year, because workers can't get there in the Northeast, and then you're affected by bad weather another 20 or 30 days. Well, hey, you move down to Southern California, you don't have snow days. You don't usually have as many bad weather days. And so you're able to produce year-round. You're able to produce more than you ever did before, more efficiently. And so weather matters. New inventions like air conditioning matter. New automobiles and trucks, because obviously trucks are probably more important to businesses than anything. More fuel efficiency. U.S. government encouraged infrastructure. They gave money to build infrastructure projects for roads, for railroad networks. Industry has really moved and shifted and grown in a lot of these southern and western cities. Number two, right to work laws. This is so important. It's also known as the open shop. There's 2 words for it. Right to work laws exist in most southern states, and they're huge to manufacturers, to businesses. It's a huge reason why they've moved down to these areas. Gosh darn it. It makes it harder for unions to form. What it says is a right to work law is that anybody can work in that industry. You don't have to belong to a union in order to do so. In a lot of closed shop or New England states, you had to belong to the union in order to get a job in the industry. What that meant was businesses tended to have to pay all workers a certain rate that was usually higher than if they negotiated individually with each worker for their wage. Southern states have open shops or right to work laws, which say any worker can work in any industry, and the business can negotiate with each worker individually for their wages in order to keep wages down. That means Southern workers tend to not belong to unions. It means Southern workers tend to have much lower wages than their Northern counterparts in the United States and also in Europe. But it also means that there's been a lot more movement of industry to these locations, so there's a lot more jobs available than there are in the northern sections of the U.S. and England and Europe. And so these are desirable places that have people moving to them because of the available jobs. So right to work laws, major reason why we've seen this move towards the Sun Belt. Lower tax rates in some of these states, less regulation of businesses and the environment. Same deal. A lot of southern states are conservative. They believe in lower taxes, which means the business has to pay lower taxes just like everybody else. That can mean for a large business savings of millions of dollars a year if they move from, for instance, Illinois down to Mississippi. Also, less regulation. Conservative states like the South do not believe in regulating businesses. They don't believe in making businesses, for instance, have to pay extra to protect the environment as much. They think that's a burden on businesses. So, for instance, businesses tend to not have to pay as many fees and in these states, which saves them money as well. We've seen the migration of certain industries start into the South beginning in the 40s and 50s. It really started with textiles, which is interesting because that was the first industry in the Northeast, and it was one of the first ones to leave. And so a lot of textile was relocated to the South, to the Southeast, to cotton mills down there in North Carolina, Virginia, even into South Carolina and Tennessee. In Europe, European governments led by the EU have encouraged the movement of industry. They've really encouraged it more so than in the US, where it's just happened, where states really compete with each other for business. In Europe, since it's all one EU economy, they've really encouraged the movement of industry into Southern and Eastern Europe, since they really direct these policies. The European, in fact, has provided financial assistance to two different groups. First, to what are called convergence regions. These are low-income regions, low-skilled job regions. These are industrial areas, usually in Southern and Eastern Europe. They try to give money or assistance to this region and to businesses that agree to move there. So if you agree to move to this low-income, low-skill area in order to try to boost the income levels and the skill level of workers, then you'll get help from the EU. You'll get assistance in order to do so. It's a lot like if a U.S. government encouraged businesses to relocate to the inner city to take advantage of jobs there. And then the EU also gives assistance to what are called competitive and employment regions. These are usually industrial core areas that are losing businesses and jobs. So like the United Kingdom, for instance. They get financial help to regions who are struggling, or so they can develop new industries to make up for the ones that they are losing as those jobs move from competitive employment regions over to the convergence regions. We need new industries and new jobs to develop to make up for the ones that are being lost. So the EU both encourages the movement of workers to convergence regions and businesses to convergence regions, and provides money to the regions that are losing those businesses and workers so they can find new ones and try to help recover from those losses. The fastest growing industrial countries in Europe are Spain. It's the fastest growing. Again, automobiles and textiles. It's especially Catalonia, the area along the coastline of the Mediterranean. Barcelona is the center of of Catalonia. That's the area where a bunch of the growth is located. Less so in Madrid, the capital. Central and Eastern Europe, Poland, the Czech Republic, Hungary have exploded in terms of industrial production. They have become fully functioning industrial economies, taking advantage of a lot of production in resources, steel, iron, coal, as well as goods from companies that have relocated there from Western and Northern Europe. Good alternatives for European countries in these areas. Why? Because they're good alternatives for European companies. A lot of European companies use workers in Latin America or Asia, but if they use Eastern European companies or countries' workers, they usually have slightly more skill, and they are closer to the markets. There are higher wages they have to pay than if they use Latin American or Asian workers, but a lot of companies prefer this in-between, kind of like American workers. American companies sometimes prefer workers in the Sun Belt, or might prefer workers in Mexico instead of the cheapest alternative over in Asia. International shifts. The following regions have had major industrial gains since the 70s as corporations take advantage of large amounts of low-wage labor. Well, we know East Asia. They've had the most incredible growth. It starts in China. In fact, China expected to pull ahead of Europe and North America in terms of industrial production. It also includes Japan and South Korea. Remember, Japan, electronics, automobiles, banking, finance, entertainment. South Korea, container ships. They're the number one container ship maker in the world, which is huge, billions and billions of dollars. Automobile industry, right, with companies like Kia and Hyundai. Steel is another Korean production as well. South Asia is one of the big gainers since the 70s. India, the big industrial power here, almost all in textiles, low cost. Also starting to build automobiles and provide services to MDCs like call centers. Since India has a large English-speaking population, they're taking over a lot of call centers and services over the phone to American and European companies. And again, a lot of low-wage workers there. Latin America also has benefited since the 70s. Much of the low-wage production has stayed local, so a lot of Latin American work has been for Brazilian companies to sell products in Brazil, or it has flowed to the United States through Mexico and Central America. Of Latin American countries, Brazil is the most industrialized, along with Argentina, although their growth is clustered with Brazil along the coastline. Steel, clothing industries, excellent examples of the switch to international labor. Steel has switched from the United States and Europe over to China for the most part. The clothing industry as well has switched not only from within the United States, from the north to the south, but it's also switched from the United States and northern Europe to East Asia, in China and Vietnam, also into South Asia, in India. Outsourcing and the new International Division of Labor. So the new International Division of Labor is very simple. It's the idea that modern businesses carefully examine every step of their production process. That's also known as a supply chain or commodity chain. It's every step of the production process that a company has to build whatever it is that they are building. And then they determine what they do is they go step by step. And steps that can be completed by low cost or low skill labor are sent to LDCs usually to be completed. And then steps that require higher skill labor usually still remain in the MDCs, or at least closer to the MDCs. This setup is known as the new International Division of Labor, and increasingly it's divided the world into the core and the periphery. And so a lot of the time what happens, again, is that core countries, if it's low skill jobs or work or steps, it goes to a peripheral country to be done. And then if it's a higher skill or step job, it's kept in the core, or it's done in a semi-peripheral country to take advantage of slightly higher skill levels, but still lower wage levels than it would be in the core. Outsourcing is the process by which companies hand over part of their production to operators in LDCs that are not owned by the corporation. So what happens is a corporation recognizes, hey, there are certain steps in our production that maybe it makes sense we don't even do ourselves. We hire a company to do that portion of the step for us, or to make that particular product for us. So a lot of times big corporations aren't actually making all the products that they are selling or using. Other companies are making them for them. For instance, my buddy's mom had a clothing company in Los Angeles, and for the Olympics, Nike used her company to outsource to make like Olympic gear, like tracksuits and stuff like that, for various countries to be sold under the Nike logo. She wasn't Nike; she just had a contract with them, where it was produced in Taiwan by his company. He was Taiwanese, by the way. And so they had outsourced that work overseas to another company, which obviously meant they didn't have control over it. They weren't paying the workers. That company was responsible and was usually hired at a discount rate because they pay their workers especially low rates and oftentimes treat them very, very poorly. Reasons for the emergence of some reemergence of some developed areas. So the one positive I think we can say is we've started to see some places in MDCs that are Rust Belt-like, where we're starting to see industry reemerge or return. Now sometimes it means the same industry has somehow come back, usually not at the same level, but it's starting to return. Or that means new industries, usually modern industries, have developed to replace those that have been lost. And again, part of this has to do with the style of work that has occurred. Remember, I already covered this once, but again, I hit on it again because it's important. You need to know Fordism and post-Fordism. Fordist work is mass production on the assembly line. Again, it's a belief that workers are like cogs in a machine. They don't really need special skills because they'll perform one specific task repeatedly to put a product together. Really killed skilled labor, right? Skilled laborers were destroyed. They were forced to take on skilled jobs a lot of times because they couldn't compete with the mass production and the prices that were being charged for products with these suddenly, incredibly lower costs. Post-mortem is also known as lean or flexible production. It's where workers operate in teams, like I said. It's much more flexibility to make decisions on their own, on tasks. Team agrees whenever problems occur. It's more quality-based. Managers are at the same level as the workers. It's very popular in modern times, especially in more modern companies. And companies involved, for instance, in social media or high-tech firms, intellectual property firms, things like that. Some firms have to be located very close to high-wage skilled workers, often with higher educations. Many require new information, new computer technology-related industries. They require the newest level workers, the most ready to go. They locate near college clusters. Like I mentioned, Silicon Valley is an area outside of San Francisco. High-tech companies cluster there. It includes Google, Facebook. If you name it, they have some sort of branch. Or LinkedIn is located there. There's a million that I am forgetting there. Anyways, they located outside of that area for a couple of reasons. One, because they got loans from banks in that area who took risks on them to get started. So they had the capital because they tended to locate there. The second reason was they wanted to take advantage of all of those graduates from the cluster of colleges in that area. Stanford, Berkeley, Davis, San Francisco. All of these were areas that they could acquire high-level, tech-savvy graduates. The same situation has happened across the country in North and South Carolina and Tennessee. We have a cluster of really powerful academic institutions in the South. Duke, North Carolina, Vanderbilt, South Carolina, Wake Forest, all located in kind of a triangular shape. So it's called the Research Triangle that takes advantage of medical graduates, research graduates in science and engineering and technology and medicine. And then other good examples are in Texas around Austin because of the University of Texas there. That's a research cluster. And then in the Northeast, MIT, Yale, Harvard. They're making high-end products and high-end clothing using some of the design majors and things coming from that area. One other term you need to know is just-in-time delivery. It's been pretty revolutionary in cutting costs, transportation costs, situation costs. What it is it requires critical parts to be located, critical part companies, so companies that are critical in producing the product to be located close to the assembly or larger factories. So for instance, if they have parts that are required for the production process. Now, a company in a factory, in an assembly plant, they don't want the parts before or after. They don't want them stocked up and just sitting there waiting. They want them delivered at the time that they need them. So, for instance, they'll tell their parts companies, which are often located right nearby them, right around them, hey, we need 10,000 of these by 8 a.m. today because we're getting an order in and we're going to be assembling everything at that time. And so the suppliers, the parts suppliers, have to be located nearby so that they can take advantage of this just-in-time delivery because manufacturers want the products when they want them, in the number that they want them. They don't want them before, they don't want them after, they don't want to have to pay money for storage, which is a cost to them. They don't want it taking up space in the factory, which is a cost and safety hazard to them. They want it delivered for assembly when they need it. A lot of times the final assembly factories are located in MDCs or very close to them, and that means all the just-in-time delivery factories have to be located wherever the big one, the MDC, is as well. All of these are reasons, post-Fordism, the reemergence of high-wage skilled workers in many urban areas, and just-in-time delivery. It's part of the reason why we've seen reemergence of some developed areas inside the U.S. and Northern Europe. Last one. Models, theories, you need to know technopoles. It's developed by Manuel Castella and Peter Hall. It really just argues, hey, what we just talked about, that high technology businesses, industries locate near centers of higher education. They take advantage of something called agglomeration of industry, which means They tend to locate and cluster together because they need very specific high-skilled workers, usually highly educated, very high-skilled professional workers, usually state-of-the-art technology knowledge that they can use to their advantage. A lot of innovators, a lot of guys with, that are entrepreneurs that come up with their own ideas. And so they cluster in these areas to take advantage of these high-skilled, high-value workers that they can hire right out of college and start to take advantage of. Examples are Boston, which is a technopole. Tech companies tend to locate there to take advantage of MIT and Harvard, which attract businesses to locate in those areas because Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Harvard, two very well-known, Boston University, Boston College, schools were really, really strong schools that attract businesses to those areas. Austin is a technopole. Again, the Silicon Valley and San Francisco, the Bay Area, is a technopole, thanks to Stanford and Berkeley. The Research Triangle is a technopole. Again, just taking advantage of certain workers, just pointing out that sometimes site factors matter more than situation factors do. Most companies tend to locate mostly because of situation, and then after that, site comes into play. But sometimes site is more important in terms of the needs of your company. And then, of course, Alfred Weber. Weber's model, the least cost theory, or the industrial location model. You must know those two terms. Least cost is its other term, used all the time. Industry locates based on the least amount of costs. They can be site or situation, related to a balance of the two. Remember, agglomeration, the clustering of companies in an industry tends to occur because people and activities tend to concentrate in an area where they can share some facilities and services to assist. I guess I should explain that. Agglomeration. Agglomeration is when all the companies in a certain area tend to cluster together. If you've ever seen, businesses seem to all locate in the same area, that's the banking area of town. Oh, that's the factory area of town. That's the warehouse area of town. That's the shopping area. This happens because a lot of times businesses, even though they compete with one another, they tend to concentrate in areas they know that people want to frequent or that people will cluster together at. So if it's a center of town area, there might be a lot of the same businesses hoping to take advantage of the same large numbers of people that live around them. Secondly, a lot of times, even though they compete with one another, businesses share warehouse facilities, or they share trucking or distribution facilities and services, things that help them to produce their products. If they don't own it or they don't produce it themselves, a lot of times they use or they'll share the same companies or warehouses to cut costs. So therefore, in order to reduce their transportation costs from these facilities, they tend to agglomerate or locate in the same areas of town. All right, so we know Weber, we know situation and site, that's the least cost theory. He also talked about agglomeration, which we'll get into a lot more with services in Chapter 12. This is Mr. M signing off. I went a little longer than I thought I would, but that's what's going to happen. We're going to test on this week, so I really hope you folks pay attention and cover all of this stuff. Good stuff. I'll talk to you soon. Love y'all. Geography, here we come. Monday in class.